The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training grounds as Maya Chen adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, fingers barely trembling despite the weight of what lay ahead. She was 26 years old, petite at 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun that revealed a face most people would describe as gentle, even kind. Her brown eyes held a softness that made strangers feel comfortable around her instantly. No one looking at her would ever imagine what she was capable of. Maya had grown up in a small farming village 3 hours outside the capital city. Her childhood was ordinary in every sense. She helped her parents tend to their vegetable gardens, walked 2 miles to school each day with her younger brother, and spent evenings doing homework by candlelight when the electricity failed. Her father was a quiet man who worked the land, and her mother sold produce at the local market. They were simple people with simple dreams, hoping their children would have better opportunities than they did. Education was the pathway out, her parents always said. Maya excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and physics. Her teachers noticed her ability to calculate trajectories and angles with remarkable speed. She could look at a problem and see the solution in her mind before putting pencil to paper. Her focus was intense, almost unnerving for someone so young. While other children played during breaks, Maya would often be found sitting alone, working through complex equations or reading advanced textbooks borrowed from the small village library. When she was 17, everything changed. The conflict that had been simmering in the border regions for years suddenly exploded into full-scale war. Armed groups began moving through rural areas, recruiting young men and sometimes women to join their cause. Maya's village tried to remain neutral, but neutrality was a luxury no one could afford. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, they heard the sound of trucks approaching. Her father told them to stay calm, to remain inside no matter what happened. The armed men went door to door that night. They were looking for supplies, for information, for recruits. When they reached Maya's home, her father stepped outside to speak with them. Maya watched through a crack in the wooden shutters as her father tried to reason with the leader, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes. The conversation grew heated. Her father refused to give them the family's food stores, refused to tell them which of the village men had spoken against the armed group. What happened next would be seared into Maya's memory forever. The gunshot echoed across the village. Her father fell to the ground, blood pooling in the dirt. Her mother screamed, rushing outside despite Maya's attempts to hold her back. The men laughed, climbed back into their trucks, and drove away, leaving Maya's father dying in front of his own home. He lasted 3 more hours, long enough to whisper to Maya that she needed to protect her mother and brother, that she needed to be strong. Then he was gone. The funeral was small. Many villagers were too afraid to attend, worried that association with Maya's family might bring trouble. In the weeks that followed, Maya's mother aged years and days. She stopped speaking much, stopped going to the market. Maya's younger brother, only 14, became withdrawn and angry. The family that had been full of laughter and hope now lived in silence and fear. Maya knew something had to change. She couldn't let her father's death be meaningless, couldn't let the men who had killed him continue terrorizing innocent people. 3 months after her father's death, Maya made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She had heard about the resistance movement, a group of fighters who opposed the armed militias that had taken over much of the countryside. They were said to be disciplined, focused on protecting civilians rather than conquering territory. Maya packed a small bag one night, left a note for her mother explaining that she would return when she could make things safer, and walked 15 miles to the nearest resistance camp. The camp commander was a woman named Sarah, a former army officer who had defected when the government failed to protect border villages. Sarah was skeptical when Maya arrived. This small young woman with no combat experience, no training, claiming she wanted to fight. Sarah had seen too many people show up fueled by anger and grief, only to break down when faced with the reality of war. But something in Maya's eyes caught her attention. There was a calmness there, a determination that went beyond simple revenge. Sarah agreed to let Maya stay, but made it clear she would need to prove herself. The resistance didn't have resources to waste on people who couldn't contribute. Maya was assigned to kitchen duty initially, preparing meals for the fighters, cleaning weapons, doing whatever was needed. She watched and listened constantly, learning everything she could about military operations, tactics, and weapons. The experienced fighters would sit around fires at night, sharing stories of missions, discussing strategy. Maya absorbed every word. After 2 months of menial work, Sarah finally allowed Maya to begin basic training. The physical conditioning was brutal. Maya had been strong from farm work, but combat training was different. She ran until her lungs burned, did exercises until her muscles screamed, practiced hand-to-hand combat until her body was covered in bruises. She never complained, never asked for breaks. When other recruits were resting, Maya was practicing more, pushing herself harder. She had something to prove, not just to Sarah but to herself. The firearms training revealed something unexpected. When Maya first picked up a rifle, the instructor assumed she would struggle with the weapon's weight and recoil. But as soon as she looked through the scope, something clicked. Her mathematical mind translated the shooting mechanics into angles, wind speed calculations, and trajectory predictions instantly. Her first shot hit the target dead center. The instructor thought it was luck. The second shot proved it wasn't. By the end of the first week of firearms training, Maya was outperforming recruits who had been training for months. Sarah noticed. She pulled Maya aside one evening and asked her directly about her skills. Maya explained her background in mathematics, her natural ability to calculate and visualize. Sarah saw potential that went beyond standard infantry work. She introduced Maya to the camp's sniper instructor, a grizzled veteran named Marcus who had served in 3 different conflicts. Marcus was known for being harsh and unforgiving, washing out 9 out of 10 candidates who wanted to become snipers. Marcus took Maya to the shooting range the next morning. He set up targets at various distances, some stationary, others moving. He gave her basic instructions about breathing control, trigger squeeze, and sight alignment. Then, he told her to shoot. Maya settled into position, feeling the rifle become an extension of her body. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and began engaging targets. One after another, her shots found their marks. Marcus said nothing, just kept setting up more difficult scenarios. Moving targets, targets partially obscured, targets at extreme distances that would challenge even experienced snipers. After 2 hours, Marcus finally spoke. He told Maya she had natural talent he had rarely seen. But talent alone wasn't enough to make a sniper. The mental aspect was even more important than the physical skill. Snipers had to be patient, able to remain motionless for hours or even days. They had to make life and death decisions in split seconds. They had to live with the weight of every life they took. He asked Maya if she understood what that meant, if she was prepared for that burden. Maya thought about her father, about all the innocent people suffering because of armed thugs who believed might made right. She thought about her mother's hollow eyes, her brother's lost childhood. She looked Marcus in the eye and said yes, she understood, and she was ready. Marcus nodded slowly, then told her that starting tomorrow, her real training would begin. The sniper training was unlike anything Maya had experienced. It wasn't just about shooting. Marcus taught her about concealment, about reading terrain and weather, about calculating wind drift and bullet drop at different distances. He taught her patience, making her lie in uncomfortable positions for hours while he walked around trying to spot her. He taught her about the psychology of combat, how to control fear and adrenaline. Most importantly, he taught her about making ethical decisions, about the difference between being a killer and being a protector. Months passed. Maya's skills grew exponentially. She could hit targets at distances that seemed impossible, could adjust for wind and elevation instinctively. But Marcus pushed her beyond technical proficiency. He created scenarios that tested her judgment, situations where the right decision wasn't always clear. He wanted to ensure that Maya would use her abilities wisely, that she understood the responsibility that came with such lethal skills. During this time, Maya learned about the broader conflict. The armed militias weren't just random thugs. They were part of a larger network funded by external powers who wanted to destabilize the region. They controlled territory through fear, committing atrocities against civilian populations who refused to submit. The resistance movement was fighting to protect these communities, but they were outgunned and outmanned. Skilled fighters like snipers were force multipliers, able to impact battles in ways that ordinary infantry couldn't. Maya also learned about the specific militia group responsible for her father's death. They had expanded their territory since that night, taking over several villages and establishing a brutal rule. The leader, the scarred man Maya had seen through the shutters, was known as Commander Rashid. He was wanted for numerous war crimes, but he surrounded himself with guards and rarely exposed himself to danger. He was a coward who sent others to fight while he enjoyed the spoils of war. One evening, Sarah called Maya to her tent. She told Maya that her training was complete, that Marcus believed she was ready for operations. But Sarah wanted to know if Maya was really prepared, not just technically but emotionally. Sarah had seen too many fighters break down after their first real combat, the difference between training and reality being too much to handle. She asked Maya to search her heart honestly and decide if this was truly the path she wanted to follow. Maya didn't hesitate. She told Sarah about the moment she had realized she couldn't just hide and hope things would get better, that action was required to create change. She spoke about her responsibility to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, about honoring her father's memory by fighting for the values he had taught her. Sarah listened carefully, then nodded. Maya would be assigned to a combat unit and given her first mission within the week. The days before her first mission were strange. Maya felt nervous but also calm, as if she had been moving toward this moment her entire life. She checked and rechecked her equipment, reviewed maps and intelligence reports, and visualized different scenarios. Marcus gave her final advice, reminding her to trust her training, to stay focused, and to never take a shot unless she was certain of her target. Killing the wrong person was something she would carry forever. The night before the mission, Maya wrote a letter to her mother. She didn't know if she would ever send it, but she wanted to express feelings she hadn't been able to share in person. She wrote about why she had left, about the training she had undergone, and about her hope that one day the violence would end and families could live without fear. She wrote about missing her father, about hoping her brother would grow up in a better world. She sealed the letter and tucked it into her pack, then tried to sleep. Morning came too quickly. Maya gathered with her unit, a team of 7 fighters including herself. Their mission was to provide security for a humanitarian convoy delivering medicine and food to a village that had been cut off by militia activity. Intelligence suggested the convoy might be ambushed, and Maya's role was to provide overwatch, using her sniper skills to identify and eliminate threats before they could attack the vulnerable supply trucks. The team moved out before dawn, traveling in a battered truck that looked like 1,000 other civilian vehicles on the roads. Maya wore simple clothes over her combat gear, appearing to anyone watching like a young woman traveling with her family. The truck took them to within 3 miles of the convoy route. Then, they disembarked and moved on foot to their positions. Maya's heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Maya's first target was the man operating the heavy machine gun. Through her scope, she could see him adjusting the weapon's position, angling it to sweep the road where the convoy would pass. He was older than her, maybe in his 40s, with a thick beard and weathered hands that moved with practiced efficiency. For a moment, Maya saw him as a person, someone who might have a family, a story, reasons for his choices. Then, she remembered the families his weapon would destroy if she didn't act. She centered the crosshairs on his chest, accounting for the slight breeze coming from the east, the elevation difference, and the distance. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. The world narrowed to just her, the rifle, and the target. Time seemed to stretch as she applied steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar force, and, through the scope, she saw the man jerk backward and fall. The sound of the shot would take a moment to reach the other militiamen, and Maya was already transitioning to her second target. The man feeding ammunition into the machine gun looked up in confusion as his companion collapsed. He hadn't heard the shot yet, didn't understand what had happened. Maya's second round caught him in the upper torso before he could process the danger. 2 down in 3 seconds. The other 6 men were starting to react now, looking around wildly, trying to understand where the attack was coming from. Their training, if they had any, was failing them in the moment of crisis. Maya's third target was a man who appeared to be the group's leader, gesturing and shouting orders she couldn't hear. Leadership was always a priority target. Remove the person making decisions, and organized resistance often crumbled into chaos. Her shot was perfect, and the leader dropped to the ground. The remaining 5 men were panicking now, some dropping flat, others running for cover behind trees and rocks. Running made them easier targets. Target 4 was a man sprinting toward a thick tree trunk. Maya led him slightly, accounting for his movement, and fired. He stumbled and fell, sliding several feet before coming to rest in the dirt. Target 5 had found cover behind a boulder, but made the mistake of peeking out to look for the shooter. Maya waited patiently for him to expose himself again. When his head appeared, she was ready. 5 down, 3 to go. The remaining 3 militiamen were properly scared now. They understood they were being picked off by a sniper, though they clearly couldn't pinpoint her location. One of them made a break for the vehicle they had arrived in, a beaten pickup truck parked about 50 meters away. Maya tracked him smoothly, letting him run for a few seconds to see if the others would follow. When he was 20 meters from the vehicle, she fired. He went down hard, and the other 2 decided the truck was not an escape option. Target 7 was the most experienced of the group. He moved tactically, using available cover, making himself a difficult target. But he made one critical error by moving along a predictable path between cover points. Maya anticipated where he would appear next, and had her scope already positioned when he emerged. Her shot caught him mid-movement. 7 down, 1 to go. The entire engagement had lasted just over 10 minutes. The final militiaman had found a depression in the ground and was lying flat, trying to make himself invisible. Maya could only see portions of him, not enough for a clean shot. She waited, knowing that patience was as much a weapon as her rifle. Minutes ticked by. The man stayed hidden, probably praying she would give up and leave. But Maya wasn't going anywhere. The convoy was getting closer, and she needed to ensure the road was completely clear. Finally, the man's nerve broke. He jumped up and ran, abandoning his weapon and any pretense of being a soldier. He was just a terrified person trying to survive. Maya tracked him for a moment, watching him sprint across open ground. Part of her, the part that was still the girl from the farming village, wanted to let him go. He was fleeing, no longer a threat. But her training told her that letting him escape meant he could warn others, could bring reinforcements, could kill civilians another day. She made the hard choice and fired her 8th and final shot. The sudden silence was overwhelming. 8 men who had been alive and preparing to kill minutes ago were now scattered across the grove, their ambush broken before it could begin. Maya felt strange, a swirl of emotions she couldn't quite identify. Relief that she had succeeded. Satisfaction that she had protected the convoy. But also a heavy weight settling onto her shoulders, the reality of what she had done. She had ended 8 lives in 12 minutes. Efficient, clean, necessary, but still 8 human beings who would never breathe again because of her choices. She keyed her radio and reported all targets neutralized. The team leader acknowledged and directed the rest of the unit to move in and secure the area. Maya maintained her position, continuing to provide overwatch in case there were additional threats she hadn't spotted. Her hands weren't shaking, her breathing was calm, but her mind was racing. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She was no longer Maya Chen the farm girl. She was Maya Chen the sniper, a killer in service of a cause she believed in. The team reached the ambush site and confirmed all 8 militiamen were dead. They recovered weapons, ammunition, and intelligence materials from the bodies. One of the fighters, a young man named David, looked up toward Maya's position with a mix of awe and fear. He had heard stories about skilled snipers, but seeing the results of one in action was different than imagining it. 8 men eliminated before they could fire a single shot. It was both impressive and terrifying. The convoy passed through safely 20 minutes later, delivering desperately needed supplies to the village. Maya watched the trucks go by from her hillside position, knowing that the drivers and aid workers would never know how close they had come to disaster. Those supplies would feed hungry children, treat sick people, and provide hope to a community that had little reason for hope. Her 8 shots had made that possible. It was a trade she had consciously made. 8 violent lives ended to protect countless innocent ones. After the convoy cleared the area, Maya's team extracted from their positions and moved back to the rally point where their vehicle waited. The drive back to camp was quiet. The other fighters glanced at Maya occasionally, seeing her differently now. She had been the new person, the untested recruit who happened to be good at shooting targets. Now she was a combat-proven sniper who had performed flawlessly under pressure. The shift in their perception was palpable. When they arrived at camp, Sarah was waiting. She had received the team leader's report and wanted to check on Maya personally. Sarah had been in combat many times and understood the psychological impact of killing, especially the first time. She pulled Maya aside and asked her directly how she was handling what had happened. Maya was honest, explaining the conflicting emotions, the weight she felt, but also the certainty that she had done what was necessary. Sarah listened carefully, then shared her own experiences. She told Maya that the weight never fully goes away, that every life taken stays with you in some way. But Sarah also emphasized that there was a difference between killing for power or pleasure and using force to protect the innocent. The key was maintaining that distinction, never letting yourself become what you were fighting against. Sarah warned Maya that she would face this challenge repeatedly, that the line between protector and monster could blur if you weren't vigilant. Over the following weeks, Maya participated in several more operations. Her reputation grew within the resistance movement. She became known as someone who could make impossible shots, who stayed calm under pressure, and who never hesitated when civilians needed protection. Commanders began requesting her specifically for high-stakes missions where precision and reliability were critical. She was becoming a valuable asset, but also a target. The militias began hearing stories about a female sniper who was disrupting their operations. Maya's personal life became increasingly isolated. The intense focus required for her work left little room for normal relationships. Other fighters respected her, but kept their distance, unsure how to relate to someone who carried death so efficiently. She wrote letters to her mother occasionally, though she never sent them. They piled up in her pack, a record of her journey from grieving daughter to hardened fighter. She wondered sometimes if her mother would even recognize the person she had become. The resistance movement achieved several significant victories during this period, liberating villages from militia control and establishing safe zones where civilians could live without constant fear. Maya's contributions to these successes were substantial. In one operation, she provided overwatch for a raid on a militia headquarters, eliminating guards and allowing assault teams to breach the compound. In another, she protected civilians evacuating from a contested area, neutralizing militia fighters who tried to prevent their escape. But success brought increased danger. The militias began adapting their tactics, knowing the resistance had skilled snipers. They moved more carefully, used more cover, and started hunting for sniper positions before conducting operations. Maya found herself in a deadly game of chess, where both sides were trying to anticipate and counter each other's moves. She had to constantly evolve her techniques, find new positions, and vary her patterns to avoid becoming predictable. During this time, Maya learned more about Commander Rashid, the man who had killed her father. He had expanded his territory and power significantly, controlling several towns and extracting tribute from the populations under his rule. He surrounded himself with loyalists and rarely left his fortified compound. Intelligence reports indicated he was responsible for numerous atrocities, including massacres of villagers who resisted his authority. He had become a priority target for the resistance, but getting to him seemed nearly impossible. Maya became somewhat obsessed with finding a way to eliminate Rashid. She studied intelligence reports, reviewed satellite imagery when available, and questioned anyone who had information about his compound and routines. Sarah noticed the obsession and warned Maya about the dangers of letting personal vendetta override tactical judgment. Rashid was heavily protected for good reason, and suicide missions helped no one. But Maya couldn't let it go. Her father's death demanded justice, and she was now in a position to deliver it. Months passed, and Maya's kill count grew. She didn't keep exact numbers, didn't want to think of her work in those terms, but she knew it was substantial. Each shot was still a conscious choice, a decision that someone threatening innocence needed to be stopped permanently. She never took pleasure in it, never became casual about taking life, but She also never hesitated when the shot needed to be taken. It was a strange balance, maintaining her humanity while doing work that was fundamentally inhuman. The resistance movement began planning a major operation, a coordinated assault on several militia strongholds simultaneously. The goal was to break the militia's control over a strategic region and open supply routes to isolated civilian populations. Maya was assigned to one of the assault teams, tasked with providing sniper support during the attack on a heavily fortified position. The mission would be the largest operation she had participated in, involving hundreds of fighters across multiple locations. Training for the operation was intense. The assault teams practiced coordination, communications, and tactical movements. Maya worked with the team leaders to identify optimal sniper positions, plan fields of fire, and establish fallback points if things went wrong. She studied detailed maps of the target area, memorizing every building, road, and potential threat location. The operation was scheduled for 2 weeks away, and every moment was spent preparing. During a planning session, Maya learned something that changed everything. Intelligence had discovered that Commander Rashid would be visiting one of the target locations on the day of the operation. He was planning to oversee a public execution of resistance sympathizers, using it as propaganda and a demonstration of his power. For the first time since her father's death, Rashid would be exposed outside his protected compound. He would be vulnerable. Maya immediately saw the opportunity. If she could position herself correctly, she might have a clear shot at Rashid during the execution event. It would be incredibly dangerous. The area would be swarming with his guards, but it might be her only chance. She approached Sarah with a proposal to adjust her assigned position to cover the execution site. Sarah was skeptical, seeing Maya's personal motivation clearly, but she also recognized the strategic value of eliminating such a high-value target. After long discussions with other resistance leaders, they approved Maya's request with strict conditions. She would have a very limited window to take the shot, and if the situation became too dangerous, she was to extract immediately rather than risk capture. The resistance couldn't afford to lose skilled fighters on suicide missions, no matter how tempting the target. Maya agreed to the conditions, but she was already planning how to make the shot work. The days before the operation crawled by. Maya prepared meticulously, checking and rechecking her equipment, reviewing every detail of the plan. She wrote another letter to her mother, this one different from the others. She wrote about possibly getting the opportunity to bring justice for her father, about how much she had changed since leaving the village, and about her hope that her actions would make the world safer for people like her brother. She sealed it and added it to the stack of unsent letters. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Maya remained perfectly still in her sniper position, muscles locked in place despite the growing discomfort. She had trained for this, spent days at a time in uncomfortable positions during her instruction with Marcus. The physical pain was manageable compared to the mental tension of waiting. Through her scope, she watched militia fighters moving around the square below, setting up a wooden platform where the executions would take place. They seemed casual, laughing, and joking as they prepared instruments of death. These men saw killing as routine, just another day's work. Civilians were beginning to gather in the square, forced by militia soldiers to witness the executions. Maya could see the fear in their faces, parents holding children close, old people standing with bowed heads. The militias used these public killings as terror tools, ensuring everyone understood the price of resistance. The victims would be resistance sympathizers or people who had refused to cooperate with militia demands. They would die slowly and painfully as a warning to others. Maya felt rage building in her chest, but forced it down. Emotion was the enemy of precision. She needed cold calculation, not hot anger. Movement at the edge of the square caught her attention. A convoy of vehicles was arriving, larger and better maintained than the typical militia trucks. Guards jumped out first, establishing a security perimeter. Then, a man emerged from the center vehicle, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. Even at 600 meters, even after years, she recognized him instantly. Commander Rashid, the man who had murdered her father, was walking toward the platform with the confident stride of someone who believed himself untouchable. He looked older than Maya remembered, his scar more prominent, his build heavier from good living while people under his control starved. He wore military-style clothes decorated with medals and insignia he had awarded himself. He carried a pistol on his hip, but had clearly forgotten how to be an actual soldier, relying entirely on the guards surrounding him. Maya watched him climb onto the platform, accepting the cheers and salutes of his fighters with casual arrogance. He was a predator who had never faced a threat he couldn't bully or buy his way out of. The prisoners were brought out next, 5 people with hands bound and faces showing various degrees of terror and resignation. 2 men, 2 women, and a teenage boy, all accused of helping the resistance. Maya recognized one of the women, a teacher from a village near her own hometown. The woman had taught basic literacy to children in secret after the militias banned education for girls. Her crime was trying to give young people hope and knowledge. For this, she would be executed in front of forced witnesses while Commander Rashid watched with satisfaction. Rashid began speaking, his voice carrying across the square through a megaphone. He talked about traitors and loyalty, about the price of defying his authority. He gestured dramatically, playing to the crowd like an actor on stage. His guards were positioned around the platform, perhaps 20 fighters with automatic weapons. They were alert, but not overly concerned, confident in their numbers and firepower. They had no idea that death was watching from 600 meters away, calculating wind speed and bullet trajectory. Maya faced an impossible decision. Her mission parameters were clear: wait for the main assault to begin before taking any action. The coordinated attack on multiple militia positions was scheduled to start in 15 minutes. If she shot now, she would alert every militia fighter in the area, potentially compromising the entire operation. She would also be exposing her position deep in enemy territory with no backup and limited escape routes. The tactical choice was obvious: wait for the operation to begin, use the chaos as cover. But waiting meant watching 5 innocent people die. Maya watched through her scope as militia fighters forced the first prisoner, one of the men, to kneel on the platform. Rashid was still talking, savoring his moment of power. The condemned man was shaking, fear overwhelming any pretense of dignity. Maya knew that once the executions began, they would proceed quickly. She would never get a clear shot at Rashid with prisoners in the line of fire. Her window of opportunity was right now, before the killing started. She thought about her father, about the promise she had made to herself when she joined the resistance. She thought about all the innocent people who had died because skilled fighters made the tactical choice instead of the right choice. She thought about the teacher being forced to watch her own execution approach, knowing she would die for the crime of teaching children to read. The tactical part of Maya's brain screamed at her to wait, to follow the plan. But the human part, the part that still remembered being a girl who believed in justice, refused to watch more innocent people die when she had the power to stop it. Maya keyed her radio and spoke quietly to the operations center. She reported that Rashid was exposed and requested permission to engage immediately. There was a long pause. Then, Sarah's voice came back, tight with tension. Sarah said the decision was Maya's to make, that she was the one on the ground who could assess the situation. But Sarah reminded her that premature engagement could cost dozens of resistance fighters their lives if the operation was compromised. The weight of that responsibility was clear. Maya acknowledged the message and made her choice. She whispered that she was engaging, then switched off her radio. There would be no more discussions, no second-guessing. She was committed now. She settled deeper into her firing position, scope centered on Commander Rashid's chest. Range, 612 meters. Wind, light from the east, approximately 5 kilometers per hour. Temperature, cool, minimal heat distortion. Target, stationary, speaking into megaphone. Probability of hit, extremely high. Probability of survival after shot, extremely low. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. The world narrowed to just her, the rifle, and the target. Rashid was gesturing dramatically, completely unaware that his last seconds of life were counting down. Maya thought briefly about her father's face, about the blood in the dirt, about all the lives this man had destroyed. Then, she stopped thinking and simply acted. The trigger broke cleanly, the rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and The round left the barrel at over 800 meters per second. The bullet crossed 600 meters in less than a second. Commander Rashid was mid-sentence when it struck him in the upper chest, the impact spinning him around and throwing him backward off the platform. The megaphone flew from his hand, his expression frozen in surprise. The crack of the rifle shot reached the square a moment later, and suddenly, everything erupted into chaos. Guards scattered, looking for cover and trying to identify where the shot had come from. Civilians screamed and ran in all directions. The prisoners on the platform stood frozen, not understanding what had happened. Maya was already transitioning to her next target. A guard had been standing directly behind Rashid and was now reaching for his radio, likely to call for reinforcements. Maya's second shot caught him before he could transmit. She moved to target 3, a guard who was scanning buildings with binoculars, getting too close to identifying her position. He went down before he could locate her. Target 4 was climbing into a vehicle, probably trying to get mobile firepower deployed. Maya's shot went through the truck's window, and the man slumped over the steering wheel. The remaining guards were properly panicked now, firing wildly in random directions, but nowhere near Maya's actual position. She continued engaging methodically, picking targets based on threat level. Guards with radios and those attempting to organize a response took priority. Those running for cover or fleeing presented lower threats. In 90 seconds, Maya fired 12 rounds and eliminated 12 targets. The precision was almost mechanical, each shot calculated and deliberate. The prisoners on the platform finally understood they had a chance to escape. The teacher woman grabbed the teenage boy and they ran together toward a side street, the other prisoners following. Several guards tried to stop them, but Maya was faster. 3 more shots, 3 more guards down. The prisoners disappeared into the warren of streets and alleys, scattering in different directions. They might not all survive the day, but they had a fighting chance now, more than they had had moments before. Maya heard shouting from the streets below her building. Militia fighters were moving toward her general area, trying to narrow down her position. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they located her. She made a rapid assessment. She could try to escape now, retreating through the building and attempting to slip away in the confusion. Or she could stay and continue engaging targets, inflicting maximum damage on the militia before they overran her position. The tactical choice was retreat. The vengeful choice was to make them pay dearly for every meter. She chose a middle path. Maya fired 4 more shots at high-value targets. 2 men who appeared to be commanders trying to rally the scattered fighters, and 2 guards carrying rocket-propelled grenades that could threaten resistance forces when the main assault began. Then, she grabbed her gear and moved swiftly toward the building's rear exit. She left her firing position just as a burst of automatic weapon fire raked the wall where she had been crouched. They had finally figured out her location. The building's back stairs were partially collapsed, but Maya navigated them quickly, her pack and rifle secured for movement. She could hear militia fighters entering the building from the front, shouting to each other as they cleared rooms. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached her floor. She exited at ground level into a narrow alley and moved rapidly toward a pre-planned escape route she had identified during her infiltration. Behind her, she heard frustrated shouts as the militia fighters discovered her empty position. The alley led to a drainage canal, dry this time of year, that ran along the edge of the town. Maya dropped into it and moved at a crouch, using the canal's depth for concealment. Gunfire echoed from the direction of the square, a mix of panicked shooting and the distinctive sound of resistance fighters engaging. The main assault had begun early, the operation commanders recognizing that Maya's actions had created an opportunity to strike while the militia was disorganized. What should have been a disciplined operation had turned into a chaotic running battle. Maya followed the canal for 300 meters, then climbed out near a cluster of abandoned buildings on the town's outskirts. She could see resistance fighters advancing into the town from the north, engaging militia positions with coordinated fire and movement. The militias were confused and scattered, their command structure disrupted by the sudden loss of Commander Rashid and his security detail. The executions that were supposed to demonstrate militia power had instead revealed their vulnerability. She found temporary cover in a partially destroyed house and checked her ammunition. She had 7 rounds remaining in her current magazine, and 3 spare magazines in her pack. Enough for sustained engagement if needed. She activated her radio and reported her status to the operations center. Sarah's voice came back immediately, tight with a mix of anger and relief. Sarah told Maya that her actions had triggered the operation early but had also created chaos that was working in the Resistance's favor. Several militia positions were already falling, and the enemy seemed unable to coordinate an effective response. Maya acknowledged and asked for instructions. Sarah told her to hold position and provide overwatch support for the advancing resistance forces. An extraction team would reach her location once the area was secure. Until then, she was to stay hidden and engage targets of opportunity. Maya confirmed and settled into a new firing position with clear sight lines toward the town center. She could see resistance fighters moving building to building, clearing militia positions with practiced efficiency. Through her scope, Maya saw a militia technical truck mounting a heavy machine gun, trying to set up a firing position to engage the resistance advance. She ranged the vehicle at 420 meters, adjusted for the slight downward angle, and fired. Her shot went through the gunner's torso, and he collapsed across his weapon. The truck's crew abandoned it and ran, leaving valuable firepower behind. A resistance team immediately moved to capture the weapon. Turning it against its former own. News of Commander Rashid's death spread rapidly through both resistance and militia networks. For the resistance, it was a propaganda victory almost as valuable as the tactical success. One of the most brutal militia commanders had been eliminated in broad daylight, in the middle of his own controlled territory, while surrounded by guards. The message was clear: no militia leader was safe. No amount of security could protect them from resistance justice. Morale among resistance fighters and sympathetic civilians soared. For the militias, Rashid's death triggered a crisis. He had been a unifying figure, someone whose ruthlessness and success commanded respect and fear from other militia leaders. Without him, the various faction commanders who had operated under his authority began competing for power. Alliances fractured, territories were disputed, and the previously coordinated militia forces descended into internal conflict. The resistance exploited these divisions ruthlessly, liberating additional territory while the militias were distracted fighting each other. Maya found herself becoming a symbol, though she didn't seek the attention. Resistance fighters who had never met her spoke about the mysterious sniper who had killed 8 men in 12 minutes during her first combat mission, then eliminated Commander Rashid under seemingly impossible circumstances. Stories grew in the telling, becoming somewhat mythologized. Some fighters claimed she could hit targets at over a mile, that she had never missed a shot, that she could predict enemy movements before they happened. Maya found the legends uncomfortable, but understood their value for morale. The reality was much more complex than the stories. Maya continued taking missions, providing sniper support for operations across the region. She was effective and reliable, but she was also accumulating psychological weight from the constant killing. Each target was a human being, and while she believed in the necessity of her actions, she couldn't make herself indifferent to what she was doing. She had vivid dreams where faces of people she had killed appeared, asking her questions she couldn't answer. Marcus noticed her struggling and made time to talk with her regularly. He shared his own experiences dealing with the mental burden of combat, the ways he had found to maintain his humanity while doing inhuman work. He emphasized the importance of remembering why she fought, focusing on the people she was protecting rather than the people she was killing. He also encouraged her to maintain connections with the part of herself that existed beyond the war, the girl from the farming village who had loved mathematics and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Maya tried to follow his advice, but it was increasingly difficult. She wrote letters to her mother, though she still never sent them. In her writing, she tried to articulate feelings she couldn't express to anyone else. She wrote about the weight of taking lives, about wondering if she was becoming the kind of person her father would have been proud of or disappointed by. She wrote about missing the simplicity of her old life, when her biggest concerns were school exams and helping with the harvest. The letters piled up, a record of her internal struggle. Approximately 6 months after Rashid's death, Sarah approached Maya, with an unusual mission proposal. Intelligence had located a militia supply convoy carrying weapons and ammunition to one of the few remaining militia strongholds. The convoy would be traveling through remote terrain, making it vulnerable to ambush. However, the convoy was heavily guarded and would be expecting potential attacks. Sarah wanted Maya to join a specialized team that would intercept the convoy and destroy the supplies. The mission would be different from Maya's typical operations. Instead of providing overwatch from a distance, she would be embedded with an assault team, using her marksmanship skills in close-quarters combat situations. It would be dangerous and chaotic, very different from the controlled sniper work she had become known for. Sarah explained that the Resistance needed versatile fighters who could adapt to different roles, and she believed Maya had the skills to be more than just a sniper. It was both an opportunity and a test. Maya accepted the mission. Part of her motivation was practical, understanding that developing diverse combat skills would make her more valuable. But part of it was also personal, a desire to prove she wasn't defined solely by her ability to kill from a distance. She wanted to demonstrate that she was a complete fighter, capable of contributing in multiple ways. The training for the close-quarters combat mission began immediately. Working with the assault team was an adjustment for Maya. She was used to operating alone or with minimal support, making her own decisions about when and what to shoot. Now she had to coordinate with a team of 8 fighters, each with specific roles and responsibilities. The team leader was a woman named Rachel, a veteran fighter who had been with the Resistance since its formation. Rachel was skeptical at first about integrating a specialist sniper into her assault team, but she gave Maya a fair chance to prove herself. The training was intense and humbling. Maya discovered that while she was exceptionally skilled at precision shooting, she had significant gaps in other combat areas. Close-quarters combat required different reflexes, different decision-making processes. She had to learn to clear buildings, to move in formation, to suppress targets rather than eliminate them. Her natural inclination was to take careful, aimed shots, but assault operations often required rapid fire to keep enemies pinned down while the team maneuvered. Rachel pushed Maya hard, demanding she meet the same standards as every other team member. There were no special accommodations for the famous sniper. Maya had to carry the same heavy equipment, maintain the same pace during movement, and execute the same complex tactical maneuvers. She struggled initially, making mistakes that would have been fatal in actual combat. But she was determined to master these new skills, working extra hours when others were resting, seeking advice from experienced team members. Gradually, Maya earned the team's respect. They saw that she was willing to learn, that she didn't expect her reputation to carry her through training. She was honest about her limitations and worked systematically to address them. Her mathematical mind helped her understand tactics intellectually, and her discipline helped her translate understanding into physical execution. By the time the mission date approached, Rachel quietly told Sarah that Maya had integrated into the team successfully. The convoy intercept mission launched on a cold morning 3 weeks after training began. The team traveled to the ambush site in a civilian truck, moving carefully through territory that was nominally under Resistance control, but where militia sympathizers could report their movements. They arrived at the designated location with 8 hours to spare, giving them time to prepare the ambush site thoroughly. The convoy would be passing through a narrow valley with steep sides, limiting their ability to maneuver or escape. Maya's role was to provide precision fire support from an elevated position while the rest of the team engaged from closer range with automatic weapons and explosives. It was a hybrid of her sniper skills and the new assault tactics she had learned. She would eliminate specific high-value targets like vehicle drivers and crew-served weapons operators, while the assault team dealt with the bulk of the enemy forces. The plan was solid, but, as Marcus had taught her, no plan survived first contact with the enemy. The convoy appeared on schedule, 6 trucks carrying supplies, and approximately 40 guards. The lead truck had a mounted machine gun, and several of the other vehicles had armed fighters standing in the truck beds. They were moving cautiously, but not slowly, clearly aware they were in dangerous territory. The convoy commander was experienced, maintaining proper spacing between vehicles and keeping his forces alert. This wouldn't be easy. Rachel gave the signal to initiate the ambush when the convoy was fully inside the kill zone. The assault team triggered explosives they had planted in the road, disabling the lead and rear vehicles and trapping the convoy in the valley. Simultaneously, Maya began engaging targets. Her first shot eliminated the machine gunner on the lead truck, preventing him from laying down suppressive fire. Her second shot killed the driver of the third truck as he tried to reverse out of the ambush. The convoy descended into chaos. Militia fighters poured out of the trucks, seeking cover and trying to establish defensive positions. The assault team engaged them with automatic weapon fire, the sound deafening in the confined valley. Maya continued picking off priority targets, her shots punctuating the constant chatter of automatic weapons. She eliminated a fighter trying to set up a rocket launcher, another who appeared to be a commander organizing a counterattack. The coordination between her precision fire and the team's suppressive fire was devastatingly effective. But the militia fighters were not breaking and running as hoped. Their commander rallied them, and they began returning organized fire. Several took positions behind their disabled trucks, creating effective cover that was difficult for the assault team to overcome. Maya watched through her scope as the militia commander directed his forces, establishing fields of fire and attempting to flank the assault team's positions. He was good, maintaining control despite the surprise and casualties. Maya made a decision. She shifted her aim to the commander, a challenging shot because he was behind partial cover and only intermittently visible. She waited patiently, watching his pattern of movement. When he emerged to shout orders to fighters on his left flank, Maya fired. The shot struck him in the shoulder, not fatal but enough to take him out of the fight. The organized resistance immediately began to crumble as subordinates argued over who should take command. The assault team pressed their advantage, advancing on the confused militia forces. Maya provided covering fire, dropping fighters who tried to establish new defensive positions. The battle turned into a running gun fight as militia survivors attempted to escape up the valley sides. The resistance fighters pursued them selectively, focusing on securing the convoy's cargo rather than inflicting maximum casualties. After 20 minutes of intense combat, the fighting ended with the militia forces scattered or eliminated. Maya descended from her position and joined the assault team in securing the area. The convoy had been carrying more weapons and ammunition than intelligence had predicted, including several crates of anti-tank weapons that would be extremely valuable for future operations. They also found documents indicating the militia had been planning a major offensive against resistance-held territory. The intercept had been even more successful than anticipated. But success had come at a cost. One of the assault team members, a young man named Thomas, had been hit during the initial exchange of fire. The bullet had gone through his leg, missing major arteries, but causing significant damage. The team's medic was working on him, but he would need evacuation to a proper medical facility. Rachel coordinated with their support elements to arrange urgent medical transport while the rest of the team prepared the captured weapons for removal. Maya helped with the wounded fighter, using her knowledge of pressure points and trauma care that all resistance fighters received. Thomas was in pain, but stable, joking weakly about the scar he would have to impress people with. Maya held his hand while the medic worked, offering what comfort she could. It was different from her usual role, being present for the human consequences of combat rather than watching from a distance. She found it both harder and more meaningful than her sniper work. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, landing in a clearing near the ambush site. Thomas was loaded aboard along with several militia wounded who the resistance had stabilized. The resistance policy was to provide medical care to all wounded, even enemies, both for humanitarian reasons and to encourage militia fighters to surrender rather than fight to the death. Thomas gave Maya a weak salute as the helicopter lifted off, and she found herself hoping desperately that he would recover fully. The team spent the next 2 hours processing the convoy site, cataloging captured materials, and preparing everything for transport. Maya worked alongside the other fighters, no longer the specialist sniper, but just another team member doing necessary work. She found satisfaction in the physical labor, the concrete accomplishment of moving boxes and organizing supplies. It was simpler than the moral complexity of shooting people, even when those people clearly deserved to be shot. During the cleanup, Maya discovered something that gave her pause. One of the trucks had been carrying personal letters from militia fighters to their families. The letters had been scattered by the explosions, and Maya picked up several while clearing the area. She read them against her better judgment, finding herself confronted with the humanity of her enemies. A young fighter wrote to his mother about missing her cooking and hoping to visit soon. Another wrote to his girlfriend about plans for their future after the war ended. These were people, not just targets. Rachel noticed Maya reading the letters and sat down beside her. Rachel had been fighting for years and had long since worked through the psychological complexities Maya was facing. She told Maya that yes, the enemies were human beings with families and dreams. But those same fighters had been transporting weapons that would be used to kill civilians, to maintain a system built on terror and oppression. Recognizing their humanity didn't change the necessity of stopping them. It just made the stopping harder to live with. The captured supplies were transported back to resistance bases over the following days. The operation was considered a significant success, disrupting militia operations and providing the resistance with badly needed weapons. Maya's contribution was noted in official reports, both her precision shooting and her effective integration with the assault team. She had proven she could be more than just a sniper, that she had the versatility to adapt to different combat roles. In the weeks following the convoy intercept, Maya participated in several more combined operations. She found she preferred the team environment to solitary sniper work. There was something comforting about being part of a group, sharing the burden of combat decisions rather than bearing them alone. Rachel's team became something like a family, fighters who trusted each other completely and worked together with practiced efficiency. Maya felt less isolated than she had in months. The resistance movement continued making gains, liberating additional territory and establishing civilian governance in areas under their control. Schools reopened, markets functioned again, and people began rebuilding lives disrupted by years of conflict. Maya visited some of these liberated areas during breaks between operations, seeing the tangible results of her work. Children attended school without fear. Markets operated without militia extortion. People spoke freely without worrying about informers. It reminded her why she fought. During one visit to a liberated town, Maya encountered the teacher she had saved during the attempted execution at Rashid's last public appearance. The woman recognized Maya somehow, though they had never spoken. She approached Maya and thanked her quietly, explaining that she had returned to teaching and now ran a school for 60 children. She said that every day she taught was a gift Maya had given her, a life that should have ended but continued because someone had been brave enough to act. Maya didn't know how to respond to such gratitude and simply told her to keep teaching, that educated children were the real future. That encounter stayed with Maya, providing perspective when the weight of her actions became overwhelming. She had killed dozens of people, had become frighteningly efficient at ending lives. But she had also saved lives, had protected people who couldn't protect themselves. The balance between destruction and protection was delicate, and she had to consciously maintain it. Marcus had been right. The key was never losing sight of why she fought, never letting the killing become about power or revenge. Maya accepted the mission the following morning. She told Sarah that she had come too far to stop now, that finishing the fight was the only way to honor all the sacrifices that had been made. Sarah nodded with understanding, but also visible sadness. She had seen too many good fighters die pursuing victory, and she knew that each dangerous mission reduced the odds of survival. But she also recognized that Maya had made her choice consciously, understanding the risks and accepting them. The preparation for the final operation consumed the next month. Maya was assigned 3 other snipers to form her team, all experienced fighters she had worked with before. There was James, a former hunter who had joined the resistance after his village was destroyed. There was Patricia, a military veteran who had defected when ordered to fire on civilians. And there was young David, who had been on Maya's very first mission and had since become an accomplished marksman himself. The 4 of them trained together constantly, developing the coordination and trust necessary for operating as a team. Their mission was complex and multilayered. They would infiltrate into militia-controlled territory 3 days before the main assault began. Their targets were 5 senior militia commanders who would be gathering for a planning meeting at a fortified compound. Intelligence indicated these commanders were attempting to consolidate the fractured militia forces and organize a coordinated defense against the expected resistance offensive. Eliminating them would throw the militia into chaos at the critical moment when the assault began. The compound where the meeting would occur was heavily defended, with guards, patrol patterns, and security measures that made direct assault nearly impossible. But the compound had one vulnerability. It was built on elevated terrain to provide defensive advantages, which meant surrounding hills offered potential sniper positions. The resistance's plan was simple in concept, but extremely difficult in execution. The sniper team would establish concealed positions in those hills and eliminate all 5 commanders simultaneously when they gathered for the meeting. The timing had to be perfect. If they struck too early, the commanders wouldn't all be present. If they struck too late, they might miss the window before the meeting ended. And they would have exactly one opportunity because after the first shot, the compound's security would go into full alert mode and extraction would become nearly impossible. It was the kind of high-risk, high-reward mission that could change the course of the entire war or could end with 4 dead snipers and no meaningful impact. Maya spent hours studying satellite imagery of the compound and surrounding terrain. She identified 3 potential firing positions that would provide clear sight lines to the meeting location. Each position had advantages and disadvantages in terms of range, concealment, and escape routes. She discussed options with her team, evaluating different approaches. They finally settled on a plan that would position all 4 snipers in different locations, providing multiple angles and backup in case any single position was compromised. Marcus pulled Maya aside the night before the team's deployment. He gave her advice that went beyond tactical considerations. He reminded her that leadership meant being responsible for her team's survival, not just the mission's success. He told her that the hardest part of command was knowing when to abort, when to recognize that conditions weren't right, and live to fight another day. Ego and stubbornness killed more soldiers than enemy action. If the mission went wrong, she needed to be smart enough to pull her team out rather than sacrifice them for a symbolic victory. The infiltration began at midnight. The sniper team traveled in a civilian vehicle to a drop-off point 20 kilometers from the compound, then moved on foot through rough terrain. They carried everything they would need for 3 days: food, water, ammunition, and camouflage materials. The packs were heavy, but all 4 team members were physically conditioned for the load. They moved slowly and carefully, avoiding known patrol routes and using natural terrain for concealment. They reached their designated assembly point in the hills above the compound as dawn broke. From this location, they could see the compound clearly, a cluster of buildings surrounded by walls and guard towers. Militia fighters moved around the compound, and Maya counted at least 30 visible guards. There would be more inside the buildings. The compound looked formidable, almost impregnable for a direct assault. But from their elevated positions, the snipers could see vulnerabilities that ground forces would never identify. The team split up, each sniper moving to their assigned position. Maya took the primary position, closest to the compound, and with the clearest sight line to the building where the meeting would occur. James moved to a secondary position 200 meters to her left, covering a different angle. Patricia and David took positions further back, providing overwatch and backup. Once in position, they would remain hidden and silent until the moment to strike. Maya's position was a narrow gap between 2 large rocks, providing excellent concealment while offering a clear view of the compound. She carefully arranged camouflage netting and natural vegetation to break up her outline, making herself virtually invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for her. She set up her rifle, ranged key points in the compound, and recorded wind and atmospheric conditions in her notebook. Then, she settled in to wait, slowing her breathing and entering the patient, meditative state that Marcus had taught her. The first day passed without incident. Militia fighters went about their routines, guards changed shifts, and vehicles came and went from the compound. Maya watched it all, learning patterns and identifying key personnel. She spotted the compound commander, a burly man who walked with authority and whom other fighters clearly respected. She identified the location where guards rested between shifts, the routes patrols typically followed, and the times when security seemed most relaxed. All of this information might be valuable when extraction time came. Night fell, bringing relief from the sun's heat, but also dropping temperatures sharply. Maya allowed herself to eat small amounts of food and drink water sparingly, maintaining her hydration without needing to leave her position for bathroom breaks. She had trained her body to function on minimal intake during operations. Around midnight, she allowed herself 2 hours of light sleep, trusting her internal clock to wake her before dawn. The sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of faces and voices, but it provided necessary rest. The second day was harder. Maintaining the same position for extended periods caused muscle cramps and joint pain. Maya had to consciously relax different muscle groups, shifting weight imperceptibly to prevent her body from seizing up. The mental challenge was even greater than the physical discomfort. Hours of watching with intense focus, while nothing significant happened, required tremendous discipline. Her mind wanted to wander, to think about other things, but she forced herself to maintain alert observation. Late on the second day, activity in the compound increased significantly. Several vehicles arrived, and Maya recognized 2 of the 5 target commanders from intelligence photos. They were arriving for tomorrow's meeting. Her heart rate increased slightly, but she controlled it consciously. The mission was becoming real. Tomorrow, if everything went according to plan, she and her team would strike a blow that could end the war, or they would die trying. Both possibilities seemed equally real. The third day dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for long-range shooting. Maya checked her equipment one final time, verifying that everything was functioning correctly. She established radio contact with her team members, confirming they were in position and ready. James reported that he had a clear line of sight to the meeting building. Patricia confirmed her Overwatch position was secure. David, the youngest and least experienced, reported ready, but Maya could hear tension in his voice. She reminded him to breathe, to trust his training, and to focus on his assigned responsibilities. The 5 militia commanders arrived at the compound throughout the morning, each with their own security details. Maya identified them systematically, matching faces to intelligence photos. There was Commander Hassan, who controlled the Eastern Territories. Commander Yusuf, known for his brutal enforcement tactics. Commander Amin, the logistics specialist who kept militia forces supplied. Commander Khalid, a former military officer who provided tactical expertise. And, finally, Commander Salah, who had emerged as the de facto leader trying to unite the fractured militias. At precisely 1100 hours, the 5 commanders entered the meeting building together. Maya watched through her scope as they disappeared inside. Intelligence indicated the meeting room was on the 2nd floor, with windows facing the hills where her team was positioned. The briefing materials suggested the commanders would gather around a large table visible from outside. Everything depended on that intelligence being accurate. If the meeting occurred in a different room or if the windows were blocked, the entire mission would fail. 15 minutes passed. Then, Maya saw movement through the 2nd floor windows. The commanders were taking seats around a table, exactly as intelligence had predicted. She could see all 5 clearly through her scope. She keyed her radio and gave her team the standby command. Each sniper would have a designated target, and they would fire on Maya's signal. The simultaneous elimination of all 5 commanders would maximize chaos and minimize the chance of anyone escaping. Maya assigned targets based on each sniper's position and capabilities. She would take Commander Salah, the primary target and most dangerous leader. James would engage Commander Hassan. Patricia had Commander Yusuf. David was assigned Commander Amin, the logistics officer. That left Commander Khalid, the military tactician. Maya made a split-second decision to assign him as a secondary target for James, who would engage him immediately after his primary target. The commanders were talking, gesturing, apparently discussing strategy. Maps were spread on the table before them. These men were planning how to defeat the resistance, how to maintain their brutal control over civilian populations. If they succeeded in coordinating their forces, the coming offensive would be far more difficult and costly in resistance lives. Maya felt no hesitation about what she was about to do. These men had made their choices, had built their power on violence and terror. They had earned what was coming. She took a final deep breath, let it out slowly, and gave the command. For rifles fired within a fraction of a second of each other. The shots coordinated with precision timing. Through her scope, Maya saw Commander Saleh's head snap back as her round struck him. In her peripheral vision, she saw other commanders falling as well. The synchronized strike was devastatingly effective. All 4 assigned targets dropped simultaneously, and James smoothly transitioned to engage Commander Khalid, who was rising from his chair in shock. The 5th commander went down before he could take 2 steps. The compound erupted into chaos. Guards rushed toward the meeting building, shouting and looking for threats they couldn't identify. Militia fighters ran in all directions, some seeking cover, others scanning the surrounding hills with binoculars. But the damage was done. All 5 commanders were down, and the carefully planned meeting had turned into a massacre. Maya keyed her radio and ordered her team to withdraw immediately. They had achieved their objective, and staying any longer would only increase the risk of casualties. The extraction was the most dangerous part of the mission. The snipers had to move away from their positions while militia forces were on high alert and actively searching for threats. Maya moved carefully but quickly, dismantling her position and packing her gear with practiced efficiency. She left no trace that would help the militia understand how the attack had been conducted or where it came from. She was a ghost, striking and then vanishing. The team moved along their pre-planned extraction route, using terrain features for concealment. They could hear shouting and vehicle engines from the compound behind them, the sound of militia forces mobilizing to search the area. But the snipers had a significant head start, and they moved with discipline and speed. Patricia and David reached the first rally point successfully. James arrived 3 minutes later. Maya was last, having taken the most exposed position and therefore having the most dangerous extraction path. They continued moving for 6 hours, putting distance between themselves and the compound before allowing themselves any rest. When they finally stopped in a hidden ravine, all 4 team members were exhausted but unhurt. They had executed one of the most difficult missions imaginable and succeeded completely. All 5 target commanders were eliminated, the militia leadership was decapitated, and the sniper team had escaped without casualties. It was a textbook special operations success. But Maya felt no triumph, only tired relief. She had killed again, had taken 5 more lives to add to the growing total. These weren't random soldiers or guards. These were leaders who bore direct responsibility for thousands of deaths and immeasurable suffering. Their elimination was justified by any reasonable measure. Yet Maya still felt the weight of those deaths, still understood that she had permanently ended 5 human existences. The necessity of the action didn't erase the gravity of it. The team remained hidden for another day, waiting for the main resistance offensive to begin. When the assault launched, they received radio confirmation that militia forces were in complete disarray. Without their senior commanders, the various militia units couldn't coordinate defensive efforts. Some units surrendered immediately. Others retreated in panic. A few fought desperately but without tactical coherence. The resistance forces advanced rapidly, encountering far less organized resistance than anticipated. Over the following week, the war effectively ended. The major militia strongholds fell one after another. Thousands of militia fighters surrendered or simply abandoned their positions and fled. Civilian populations in formerly occupied territories welcomed resistance forces as liberators. The brutal system of control that had dominated the region for years collapsed almost overnight. It wasn't a perfect victory. Some militia leaders escaped, and pockets of resistance would continue fighting for months. But the organized threat was broken. Maya and her team were extracted once the main offensive secured their area. They returned to base to find celebrations everywhere. Fighters were singing and dancing, civilians were crying with joy, and there was a sense of possibility in the air. After years of desperate struggle, the resistance had achieved what had seemed impossible. They had won. The militias were defeated, and the work of building a better society could begin. Sarah found Maya during the celebrations and pulled her aside. She told Maya that her team's mission had been the critical factor in the victory, that eliminating the militia leadership at the perfect moment had made everything else possible. Official recognition would come later, but Sarah wanted Maya to know personally how important her contribution had been. Maya accepted the praise quietly, still processing everything that had happened. In the days following the victory, Maya struggled with a question that had no clear answer. What happens to a weapon when the war is over? She was exceptionally skilled at violence, had spent years developing abilities that were only useful for killing. Her entire identity had become wrapped up in being a sniper, in doing difficult and necessary work that few others could do. But, with the war ending, what purpose did those skills serve? She couldn't simply return to farming after everything she had experienced and done. The resistance movement was transitioning into a governance structure, taking responsibility for administering the liberated territories. There were discussions about forming a national security force, a professional military that would be different from the brutal militias it had fought against. Maya was approached about joining this new force, using her expertise to train the next generation of soldiers. It was a path forward, a way to use her skills constructively rather than letting them atrophy. But Maya wasn't certain that was the right choice for her. She had spent years in constant combat, and part of her desperately wanted peace. She thought about her mother and brother, whom she hadn't seen in years. She thought about the simple life she had left behind, the dreams she had abandoned. Could she return to any of that after everything she had become? Would her family even recognize the person she was now? She decided to visit her home village before making any decisions about her future. The journey took 2 days through territory that was still recovering from years of conflict. She saw destroyed buildings being rebuilt, fields being replanted, and schools reopening. The physical scars of war were everywhere, but people were working to heal them. The psychological scars would take much longer to fade. Her village was smaller than she remembered, the buildings shabbier, the roads more rutted. But it was peaceful in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. Children played in the streets without fear. Adults worked in fields and gardens, focused on ordinary concerns rather than survival. It was the world her father had wanted, a world where people could live simple lives without terror. Maya's mother was working in the garden when Maya arrived. She looked older, her hair gray, and her face deeply lined. But when she saw Maya approaching, her expression transformed from concentration to shock to overwhelming joy. She dropped her gardening tools and ran to embrace her daughter, crying and laughing simultaneously. Maya held her mother tightly, feeling years of accumulated tension begin to release. Her brother was there too, now 17 and nearly a man. He had grown tall and strong from farm work, looking remarkably like their father. He regarded Maya with a complex mix of emotions: joy at her return, uncertainty about how to relate to her, and perhaps a hint of fear. He had heard stories about his sister the fighter, the sniper who had helped win the war. Reconciling those stories with his memories of his gentle older sister was clearly difficult. The three of them sat together that evening, and Maya's mother wanted to know everything that had happened. Maya tried to explain, to describe her journey from grieving daughter to resistance fighter to accomplished sniper. She was honest about the violence, about the people she had killed, and the decisions she had made. Her mother listened without interrupting, her face showing pain, but also understanding. When Maya finished, her mother said something simple but profound. She was grateful Maya had survived, and she believed Maya's father would be proud that his daughter had fought for justice rather than accepting injustice. Maya stayed in the village for 2 weeks, reconnecting with family and trying to remember how to live without constant vigilance. It was harder than she expected. She found herself automatically scanning for threats, planning escape routes, and startling at sudden noises. Her combat instincts were so deeply ingrained that relaxing felt unnatural and dangerous. She slept poorly, plagued by dreams of missions and faces of people she had killed. But gradually, small moments of peace began breaking through. Helping her mother in the garden, feeling soil under her fingernails, teaching mathematics to children in the village school, using her natural abilities for something constructive, sitting with her brother in the evenings, listening to him talk about his hopes for the future. These simple activities reminded her that she was more than just a weapon. that the girl from the farming village still existed somewhere inside the hardened fighter. Sarah sent her a message during the second week, asking Maya to return to the base for important discussions about the future. Maya knew she couldn't stay in the village indefinitely, that she would need to make decisions about her path forward. She told her mother she would need to leave, but promised to visit regularly. Her mother accepted this with sad understanding, recognizing that her daughter had been changed by experiences that couldn't be undone. When Maya returned to base, she found the resistance in the midst of transformation. The fighters were being reorganized into formal security forces with proper training, discipline, and accountability. Sarah was heavily involved in establishing the new structure, working to ensure that the fighters who had won the war wouldn't become the next generation of oppressors. It was delicate work, balancing military effectiveness with civilian oversight and human rights protections. Sarah offered Maya a position as chief sniper instructor for the new security forces. It would involve training recruits in marksmanship and tactics, developing doctrine and procedures, and serving as a technical advisor on precision shooting operations. It was work that would use Maya's skills while keeping her out of direct combat. Sarah emphasized that Maya had given enough to the war effort, that she had earned the right to step back from the front lines. Maya considered the offer carefully. Training others would allow her to pass on hard-won knowledge, to ensure that the next generation of fighters would be more skilled and perhaps suffer fewer casualties. It would give her purpose and use her expertise constructively. But it would also keep her in the military world, surrounded by weapons and violence, even if she wasn't pulling the trigger herself. She wasn't certain that was the future she wanted. She asked Sarah for time to think about it, and Sarah gave her a month to make a decision. During that month, Maya visited various parts of the liberated territories, seeing how people were rebuilding their lives. She met with other veterans, hearing how they were transitioning to civilian life. Some were struggling, unable to find purpose outside of combat. Others were thriving, discovering new interests and capabilities. There was no single path that worked for everyone. Maya also spent time with Marcus, her original sniper instructor. He had decided to retire from active service and was planning to return to his family farm. They sat together one evening, talking about the war and what came after. Marcus told Maya that the hardest part of being a soldier wasn't the fighting but learning how to stop fighting. The skills and instincts that kept you alive in combat could make peace feel uncomfortable and wrong. The challenge was finding ways to honor what you had done while not being trapped by it. In the end, Maya made a choice that surprised even herself. She accepted Sarah's offer to become a sniper instructor, but only on a part-time basis. She would spend half her time training new soldiers and half her time teaching mathematics at a school for war orphans. It was a balance between who she had become and who she had been, between using her deadly skills responsibly and nurturing something constructive. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt right to her. The school she chose to teach at was in the town where she had eliminated Commander Rashid. The building had been repaired, and the execution platform torn down. Children now played in the square where militias had once conducted public killings. The transformation was remarkable, a physical manifestation of how much had changed. Maya found satisfaction in teaching these children, many of whom had lost parents to the war. She was helping create a future where mathematics might solve more problems than violence. Her teaching style was different from what the children were used to. She made mathematics practical, relating concepts to real-world applications. She encouraged critical thinking and problem-solving, skills that would serve students whether they became engineers or farmers or teachers themselves. The children responded to her intensity and genuine interest in their success. Some of the older students even learned about her background and viewed her with awe, though Maya tried to downplay her combat history. The sniper training work was equally important. Maya developed comprehensive courses that went beyond just shooting skills. She taught her students about ethical decision-making, about the responsibility that came with lethal force, and about the psychological costs of combat. She wanted the next generation of snipers to be more than just skilled marksmen. She wanted them to be thoughtful professionals who understood when not to shoot as clearly as when shooting was necessary. One of her first students was David, the young sniper who had been part of her team during the final mission. He wanted to improve his skills and eventually become an instructor himself. Maya worked with him intensively, refining his technique and helping him develop the mental discipline required for precision shooting. She saw in him the same dedication she had brought to her own training, and she pushed him to be better than he thought possible. Months passed, and Maya found a rhythm in her dual life. The teaching balanced the military training, reminding her constantly that the goal was protecting life rather than taking it. She still had difficult days when the weight of her past actions felt overwhelming. She still had dreams about faces and voices. But she also had moments of genuine peace, times when she felt connected to something larger than violence and survival. She maintained regular contact with her family, visiting the village every few weeks. Her relationship with her mother deepened as they learned to understand each other as adults rather than parent and child. Her brother eventually opened up to her about his own struggles with anger over their father's death, and Maya was able to share hard-won wisdom about channeling pain into constructive action rather than destructive revenge. The healing was mutual and ongoing. Sarah became not just Maya's commander but her friend and mentor in life beyond combat. They talked regularly about the challenges of transition, about maintaining identity when the defining struggle was over. Sarah shared her own journey from soldier to leader to builder of new institutions. She emphasized that veterans had valuable skills beyond violence, that the discipline and focus they had developed could be applied to creating rather than destroying. The new security forces that Maya helped train were fundamentally different from the militias they had fought. There was genuine oversight, real consequences for misconduct, and a culture that emphasized protection of civilians rather than control of them. It wasn't perfect. Old habits and attitudes persisted in some fighters. But the overall trajectory was positive, moving toward professional military forces that served the people rather than exploiting them. Maya felt proud to contribute to that transformation. 3 years after the war ended, Maya received an unexpected visitor at the school. It was the teacher she had saved from execution, the woman who had thanked her years before. The woman had heard Maya was teaching and wanted to invite her to a special event. A group of educators from across the liberated territories were gathering to discuss rebuilding the education system, and they wanted Maya to speak about the importance of education as a tool for peace and development. Maya was hesitant, uncomfortable with public speaking, and uncertain what she could contribute to educational policy discussions. But the teacher insisted, explaining that Maya's unique perspective as someone who had fought in the war and then chosen to teach would be valuable. Maya eventually agreed, though she worried about what she would say. She had become comfortable teaching individuals, but had never addressed large groups about abstract topics. The education conference brought together hundreds of teachers, administrators, and policymakers. They gathered in a large hall that had been a militia headquarters before being converted to a community center. The symbolism wasn't lost on Maya as she prepared to speak. She was standing in a place that had represented violence and oppression, which now hosted discussions about building better futures through education. It was a powerful reminder of how much had changed. When Maya's turn came to speak, she walked to the podium feeling more nervous than she had felt before any combat mission. Public speaking terrified her in ways that enemy fire never had. But she thought about the children she taught, about the future they deserved, and she found her voice. She spoke simply and honestly about her journey from student to soldier to teacher. She talked about how education had given her the mathematical skills that made her an effective sniper, but also the critical thinking that helped her recognize when violence was necessary and when it was simply destructive. She emphasized that the next generation deserved better than to grow up surrounded by violence as hers had. Education wasn't just about reading and arithmetic. It was about creating citizens who could solve problems through reason rather than force, who could build rather than destroy. She acknowledged that some situations required force to protect the innocent, but those situations should be rare exceptions rather than constant realities. Every child taught well was a potential future conflict prevented. The audience listened with intense attention. Many were veterans themselves or had lost family members to the war. Maya's words resonated because she had lived them, had made the journey from violence to peace, and found purpose on the other side. When she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous and sustained. People stood, many with tears in their eyes, moved by the simple power of her message. After the conference, several people approached Maya about expanding her teaching work. There was a proposal to create a specialized school for war orphans that would provide both academic education and psychological support for trauma. The planners wanted Maya to be involved in designing the curriculum and training teachers. It was a larger responsibility than she had anticipated, but also an opportunity to impact far more lives than she could reach through direct teaching alone. Maya consulted with Sarah, Marcus, and her family about whether to take on this new role. Everyone encouraged her, recognizing that she had found her true calling in education rather than combat. Even her sniper students, who valued her military instruction, agreed that her teaching work was where she made her greatest contribution. Maya decided to accept the position, gradually transitioning away from military training to focus full-time on education. The School for War Orphans opened 2 years later in a newly constructed building funded by international aid organizations. It housed 200 children from across the region, providing them with housing, education, psychological counseling, and vocational training. Maya served as the school's director of academic programs, overseeing a staff of 30 teachers and counselors. It was challenging work, very different from anything she had done before, but deeply fulfilling. The children arrived carrying tremendous trauma. Many had witnessed atrocities, lost entire families, and lived through experiences no child should endure. Maya understood their pain in ways that civilian teachers couldn't, and she used that understanding to create programs that acknowledged trauma while refusing to let it define the children's futures. She insisted that the schools celebrate small victories, that it focus on what students could become rather than what they had survived. Mathematics remained her favorite subject to teach personally. She would often take small groups of students and work through problems with them, using the logical discipline of math as a tool for rebuilding fractured thinking processes. She found that students who struggled with emotional regulation often responded well to mathematics clarity and structure. Problems had definite solutions, rules were consistent, and success came from methodical effort rather than luck or force. It provided stability in lives that had known mostly chaos. 5 years after the war ended, Maya received recognition she had never sought. The new national government established awards for individuals who had made extraordinary contributions during the conflict and its aftermath. Maya was honored both for her combat service and her educational work. She attended the ceremony reluctantly, uncomfortable with public attention. But she accepted the recognition as representative of all the fighters who had made difficult choices and then worked to build peace. At the ceremony, she was introduced to families of some of the militia fighters she had killed. The new government had established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, trying to heal the wounds of war through acknowledgement and understanding rather than revenge. These families wanted to meet Maya, not to accuse her but to understand what had happened to their loved ones. It was one of the hardest conversations Maya ever had, facing people who mourned those she had killed and explaining why their deaths had been necessary. The encounters were painful, but also healing. Maya learned that several of the men she had killed had been forced into militia service through threats to their families. Others had been idealistic young men who believed they were fighting for righteous causes, manipulated by leaders like Rashid. They weren't all monsters. Some were victims of the same systems of violence that had killed Maya's father. Understanding this didn't change Maya's choices. Those choices had been tactically and morally correct given the information available. But it deepened her understanding of the costs of war. One family particularly affected Maya. An elderly woman approached her with photos of her son, one of the 8 men Maya had killed in her first combat mission. The woman explained that her son had been a schoolteacher before the war, forced into militia service when fighters threatened to burn his school with students inside. He had written letters to his mother describing his horror at what he was forced to participate in. The woman told Maya that she didn't blame her for her son's death. She blamed the systems and leaders that had put them all in impossible situations. Maya listened to the woman's story, tears running down her face. She apologized for the pain she had caused, even while knowing her actions had been necessary to protect the humanitarian convoy. The woman embraced her and They cried together over the senseless waste of war, over a teacher forced to become a soldier and a student forced to become a killer. It was a moment of shared grief that transcended blame, acknowledging that they had both been victimized by violence even as they had also perpetuated it. These conversations with victims' families changed Maya fundamentally. She had always understood intellectually that her targets were human beings with lives and families, but confronting that reality directly was different. It reinforced her commitment to education and peacebuilding, to creating a world where young people wouldn't face the impossible choices she and others had faced. It also helped her forgive herself, recognizing that she had done what she believed necessary while carrying appropriate weight for those actions. 10 years after the war ended, Maya's school had expanded to serve over 500 children. Many of the original students had graduated and moved on to universities or careers, carrying with them the resilience and skills they had developed. Several returned to teach at the school, wanting to give other children the same opportunities they had received. The school had become nationally recognized as a model for trauma-informed education, and educators from other conflict zones visited to learn from its programs. Maya herself had aged visibly, her hair showing gray despite being in her mid-30s. The years of combat and stress had taken their toll physically, but she had also softened in some ways, learning to laugh more freely and trust more easily. She had even begun dating a fellow teacher, a quiet man who taught history and who had also lost family to the war. They understood each other's burdens without need for constant explanation. It was a gentle relationship built on shared purpose rather than intense passion, and it suited them both. She maintained contact with her former teammates. James had become a park ranger, using his tracking and observation skills to protect wildlife. Patricia had entered politics, advocating for veterans' rights and civilian oversight of military forces. David had followed Maya's path into education, teaching physical education and coaching youth sports teams. They gathered occasionally to remember fallen comrades and to marvel at how far they had all come from their days as fighters. Marcus had passed away peacefully 2 years earlier, surrounded by family on his farm. Maya had spoken at his funeral, describing him as the teacher who had shaped not just her combat skills, but her understanding of responsibility and ethics. His daughter, now an adult, had given Maya his sniper rifle as a keepsake, saying her father would have wanted Maya to have it. The rifle hung on Maya's office wall, unloaded and purely symbolic, a reminder of what she had been and what she had chosen to move beyond. Sarah had become the nation's first Minister of Defense, working to build security forces that protected rather than oppressed. She and Maya remained close, meeting regularly to discuss the challenges of nation-building and personal growth. Sarah often said that Maya's choice to transition from fighter to educator had inspired many other veterans to find constructive paths forward. She believed that Maya's real contribution to peace wasn't the targets she had eliminated, but the children she had taught to resolve conflicts through reason rather than violence. On the 15th anniversary of her first combat mission, Maya stood in the hills where she had eliminated those 8 militia fighters preparing to ambush the humanitarian convoy. The area looked completely different now, peaceful farmland dotted with small villages. Children played in fields where she had once hidden in sniper positions. It was a profound transformation, made possible by the difficult choices countless people had made during the war and its aftermath. Maya thought about the person she had been that day, the grieving daughter who had become a lethal instrument. She thought about the 8 men who had died not knowing what hit them, about Commander Rashid falling from the platform, about all the lives she had ended in service of protecting others. She felt the weight of those deaths as clearly as she had 15 years before. The burden hadn't lessened with time. She had simply learned to carry it better. But she also thought about the children in her school, about their laughter and dreams and potential. She thought about the teachers she had saved, now training the next generation of educators. She thought about the families healing through truth and reconciliation, choosing understanding over revenge. She thought about a nation slowly building institutions based on justice rather than force. These were the fruits of all that violence, the world that had been protected and created through terrible choices made by imperfect people doing their best. Standing in those hills, Maya finally, allowed herself something she had denied for 15 years. She forgave herself. Not because her actions didn't matter or because the deaths she had caused were inconsequential, but because she had carried the weight appropriately, had used her gifts to protect rather than dominate, and had ultimately chosen building over destroying. She would never forget what she had done or who she had been. The sniper would always be part of her, that precision and discipline and willingness to make hard choices. But it would be only part of her, balanced by the teacher, the student, the daughter, and all the other identities she had integrated into a whole person. As the sun set over the peaceful farmland, Maya turned and walked away from the hills. Tomorrow she would return to her school, to children who needed her knowledge and care. She would teach mathematics and help heal trauma and build futures. She would continue the work of turning the chaos of war into the possibility of peace. It wasn't dramatic or headline-worthy, but it was honest work that honored both what she had been and what she had chosen to become. The story of the sniper who had eliminated 8 targets in 12 minutes would be told for generations, a legend of skill and courage. But Maya Chin's real story was quieter and, perhaps more important, the story of a weapon that chose to become a teacher, of violence transformed into protection, of a girl who went to war and found her way back to peace. It was the story of someone who had done terrible necessary things and then dedicated the rest of her life to making those things less necessary for others. That was the legacy she wanted to leave, not the kills but the lives saved and shaped and made better by her presence in the world that other than necessity. Sarah called Maya to a private meeting 6 months after the convoy intercept. She explained that the resistance was planning its most ambitious operation yet, a coordinated assault on the remaining militia strongholds with the goal of ending the conflict decisively. The operation would require all available forces and would be extremely dangerous. But intelligence suggested the militias were fracturing internally, their morale broken by constant defeats. If the resistance struck hard enough, the remaining militia forces might collapse entirely or negotiate surrender. Maya would have a critical role in the operation, leading a sniper team that would eliminate key militia commanders and disrupt their command structure before the main assault. It would be similar to what she had done during Rashid's execution, but on a larger scale and with better coordination. Sarah was frank about the risks. Maya would be operating deep in enemy territory with minimal support, and if things went wrong, extraction might not be possible. She needed to understand that accepting this mission might mean she wouldn't come back. Maya asked for time to think about it. That night, she went through the stack of letters she had written to her mother over the months and years of fighting. She read them chronologically, watching her own transformation from angry girl seeking revenge to hardened fighter struggling with the cost of violence to someone trying to maintain humanity in inhuman circumstances. The letters charted a journey she hadn't fully recognized while living through it. She was no longer the person who had left her village, and she would never be that person again. She thought about her father, about the values he had tried to teach her. He had believed in education, in peaceful solutions to problems, in treating others with dignity and respect. Would he be proud of what she had become, a killer who was admittedly very good at her work? Or would he be horrified that his daughter's hands were soaked in blood, even if that blood belonged to people who arguably deserved their fate? Maya would never know the answer, but she suspected he would understand even if he didn't approve of Nurse. The battle continued for another hour, though the outcome was never in doubt once the militia lost its command structure. Pockets of fighters attempted to mount resistance, but without coordination, they were picked apart by disciplined resistance teams. Maya continued providing sniper support, eliminating threats before they could inflict casualties on the advancing forces. She fired 23 more rounds during the engagement, each shot carefully aimed, each target selected for tactical value rather than simple opportunity. As the fighting died down, Maya saw something that made her pause. Near the platform where the executions were supposed to occur, a group of civilians had gathered around Commander Rashid's body. They weren't mourning. They were celebrating. Some were spitting on the corpse. Others were crying with relief. An old man stood over the body and spoke words Maya couldn't hear, but his expression showed years of accumulated rage finally finding release. This was what Rashid's rule had created, so much hatred that even elderly civilians rejoiced at his death. Maya felt strange watching the scene. She had killed Rashid, had ended his life with a single well-placed shot. It was justice for her father, for all the innocents he had murdered, for the terror he had spread across the region. But it was also just one death among dozens she had caused that day. Rashid was gone, but the system that had enabled him remained. Other commanders would try to take his place. Other militias would continue threatening civilians. Her actions had won a battle, but not the war. The extraction team reached her position as the sun began setting. They were led by David, the young fighter who had been on her first mission. He looked at her with open admiration, having heard about her shooting performance from other fighters. He told her that resistance commanders were calling her actions reckless, but brilliant, that she had single-handedly decapitated the enemy command structure and turned what should have been a difficult assault into a rout. Maya accepted the praise silently, too tired and emotionally drained to feel proud. The team moved back to base under cover of darkness, traveling through territory that had been hostile that morning but was now under resistance control. They passed through the town square where the executions were supposed to happen. The platform had been torn down, and locals were dancing and singing, celebrating their liberation. Children who had been forced to watch public killings were now playing freely, their laughter carrying across the square. It was a stark transformation, made possible by violence, but resulting in joy. When they reached base, Sarah was waiting for Maya personally. She pulled Maya aside for a private conversation, and her expression was serious. Sarah acknowledged that Maya's actions had achieved a major victory and eliminated a high-value target. But she also emphasized that Maya had disobeyed orders, had endangered the operation, and had made a decision based on personal vendetta rather than tactical necessity. Other fighters were watching, and if Maya wasn't held accountable, it would undermine discipline across the entire resistance movement. Maya accepted the criticism without argument. She knew she had made the choice consciously, understanding the potential consequences. She told Sarah that if punishment was required, she would accept it without complaint. But she also said that if she faced the same situation again, she would make the same choice. Some opportunities only came once, and some evils needed to be stopped regardless of tactical considerations. Sarah listened, and then said something that surprised Maya. Sarah told her that she understood, that she had made similar choices in her own combat career, decisions that violated protocol, but aligned with deeper principles. But Sarah also warned Maya that she couldn't keep making those choices and expect to survive. The war needed soldiers who followed orders, not heroes who died for personal satisfaction. If Maya wanted to continue fighting, she needed to find a balance between her conscience and her duty. Otherwise, she would end up dead or worse, captured and used as militia propaganda. The conversation ended with an understanding. Maya would be officially reprimanded for breaking the operation timeline, but informally praised for her combat effectiveness. She would continue serving as a sniper, but with closer oversight on mission planning. And she would have to accept that her actions, while successful this time, had been incredibly risky and not a model for future operations. Maya agreed to the terms, recognizing that Sarah was trying to protect her from herself. Marcus, her sniper instructor, sought her out the night before the operation. He had heard about her plan to target Rashid and wanted to give her final advice. He reminded her that revenge and justice were different things, that she needed to stay tactical and not let emotion drive her decisions. If the shot wasn't there, if the risk was too high, she needed to be professional enough to walk away and wait for another opportunity. Personal satisfaction wasn't worth dying for. Maya listened respectfully, but Marcus could see in her eyes that she had already made her decision. If the opportunity presented itself, she would take the shot regardless of the risk. Marcus sighed, recognizing the determination he had seen in countless soldiers over the years. He told her to trust her training, to be smart, and to come back alive. Then, he gave her a small charm, a piece of polished stone that had belonged to his daughter, killed years ago in a militia attack. He said it had kept him focused on why he fought rather than just who he hated. The morning of the operation arrived cold and clear. Maya assembled her gear with practiced efficiency, each item going into its designated place. Her rifle was cleaned and zeroed, ammunition counted and ready, communications equipment tested and functioning. She joined her assault team for final briefings, though her mind was already racing ahead to the moment when she might see Commander Rashid through her scope. After years of training, months of combat, and countless lives taken, she was finally going to have the chance to settle the debt that had started her on this path. The team moved out in darkness, traveling in a convoy of vehicles disguised as civilian traffic. They separated as they approached the target area, each element moving to their assigned positions. Maya's insertion point was a partially collapsed building about 600 meters from where the execution was scheduled to take place. She would have to move through militia-controlled territory to reach it, a dangerous infiltration that required perfect timing and a little luck. As dawn broke, Maya separated from her team and began her solo movement toward her position. She moved through back alleys and bombed-out buildings, using rubble and shadows for concealment. She passed close enough to militia patrols to hear their conversations, freezing in place until they moved on. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. This was different from previous missions. This time, she was operating deep in enemy territory with no backup, pursuing a target that represented her deepest personal motivation. She reached the building without being detected and climbed to the third floor, where a partially destroyed wall provided an opening with clear sight lines to the execution site. She set up her rifle, arranged her equipment, and settled in to wait. The execution was scheduled for mid-morning, still 3 hours away. Maya controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and became motionless. She was no longer Maya the person. She was an instrument of precision, waiting for the moment to deliver justice that was years overdue. She found her position on a hillside overlooking the road where the convoy would pass. The location gave her excellent sight lines for over a mile in both directions. She set up her rifle, adjusted the scope, and ranged key points along the road. Then, she settled in to wait, slowing her breathing, becoming still as stone. The other team members were positioned around the area, ready to respond to any threats Maya identified. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose. Sweat ran down Maya's face, but she didn't move to wipe it away. She had trained for this, learned to ignore discomfort, and maintain focus. She scanned the terrain methodically, looking for anything out of place, any sign of militia fighters preparing an ambush. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, she saw movement. About 800 meters down the road, partially hidden in a grove of trees, several men were positioning themselves. Maya watched through her scope as they set up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun, positioning it to fire on vehicles passing on the road. She counted 8 men total, all armed, all clearly preparing for an attack. The convoy was still 30 minutes away. Maya keyed her radio and reported the contact, describing the position and number of hostiles. The team leader asked if she could neutralize the threat. Maya's training kicked in automatically. She assessed the situation calmly, calculating distances, wind speed, and the order in which she would need to engage targets. The machine gun crew was the priority, then the men providing security. If she worked quickly and efficiently, she could eliminate the entire group before they could react and endanger the convoy. She confirmed to the team leader that she could handle it. Maya took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She had trained for this moment for months, but now it was real. These weren't training targets, they were human beings. But they were also people who had chosen to attack humanitarian workers, to murder those trying to help suffering civilians. Maya thought about her father, about all the innocent people these men would kill if she didn't stop them. She made her choice. Her finger touched the trigger, and Maya became what she was trained to be. In the next 12 minutes, she would prove that the quiet girl from a farming village had transformed into one of the most dangerous weapons in the resistance arsenal. The militiamen positioning themselves for an ambush had no idea that death was already watching them through a scope, calculating, preparing, and ready to strike.